Today, we're excited to have Dr. Alvaro Rivera from UCL. He's an associate professor there, and he's going to be talking about his work with FutureDAMS called Financing National Scale Energy Projects in Developing Countries. Alvaro specializes in macroeconomic modeling. He's worked extensively with global CGE models applied to the analysis of water resources, ag policies, land use and bioenergy policies, renewable energy, and climate change. And then along with Alvaro, one of the other co-authors of the paper, Mohammad Bashir, who is a PhD student with FutureDAMS as well. He's based at the School of Mechanical, Aerospace, and Civil Engineering, will be available to answer questions as well. So yeah, over to you, Alvaro.
Thank you very much, and welcome to this webinar. So today I'm going to present a work that we are doing here at UCL with constant support of the whole FutureDAMS project. And the work that I'm going to present here is one of the case studies that we have. This is for the case study Ghana. And the work that I'm going to present is basically a work that talks about that we need to consider not only direct effects when we are considering large energy projects, like in this case, that we also need to stress on considering indirect and induced impacts. So this work has mainly been done by Victor Nekifor and Mohammad Bashir. I think both are here. And we have also received the support from Julian, and our local partner is Emmanuel, and he is working in the Water Research Institute in Ghana. So I'll give a small introduction and why we are trying to assess these impacts in economy-wide model is because the infrastructure projects have a substantial economic, social, and environmental implications. And this is not only during the operation phase. We have these impacts during the construction, the financing, and the operation phase. And this is what we want to assess in this paper. And we know that in low and medium countries, this investment in infrastructure can be very huge, 1 or 2 digits of the annual GDP. And we also have to think on the global decarbonization targets, because they will impose a great infrastructure challenges to developing countries. They will have basically to change their energy systems to improve efficiency in households, in industries, and this will require, of course, a great amounts of money. But they face a problem is that they don't have an easy access to finance. So without external financing and relying only on internal public and private savings, these countries could face a negative effect because of the crowding out of investment in other areas of the economy. And at the same time, as we will see here in this example, some foreign lending or investments in developing countries with low credit rating can be accompanied by specific conditions. As we will see that these specific conditions can generate their own income implications. So the research gap that we found here, as I mentioned briefly before, is that most of the studies focus on assessing the direct impacts of these energy projects. And this would be the electricity production, for example. And they don't consider the indirect or induced effects, which are related to the supply chain impacts, to the income effects, and of course, to the financial effects that one of these projects could have. So we aim and we have prepared a framework in which we can assess all different phases of, in this case, the Bui Dam construction, financing, and operation. So let's go to the Bui Dam case. So the Bui Dam, it is located in the Volta River in Ghana, and the Volta River in Ghana, the Volta River Basin is in West Africa, and it is geographically shared by 6 countries. 80% of the river basin is shared by Ghana and Burkina Faso. And the Volta River has 3 main tributaries: the Black Volta, the White Volta, and the Oti River. And the construction of the Bui Dam, which is here, started in 2009 and it has finished in 2013, and it has a power generation capacity of 400 megawatts. The Akosombo Dam, which is here, it is located downstream of the Bui Dam, and it is the largest hydropower plant in Ghana and in the Volta Basin, with a power generation capacity of 1,020 megawatts. So here we can see the main direct impacts of the Bui Dam in the different phases. In the construction phase, so basically the Bui Dam cost $622 million US, and it has been built in 4 years from 2009 to 2012. And of course, this cost needs to be financed, and the Ghanaian government has financed in the following way: 60 million US from government expending, then also have a 20-year concessional loan of 270 million US at an interest rate of 2%, and they also have another loan for 12 years, which covered 292 million US at a 0.3% over the commercial interest rate, which was set at 3.5. This loan is from Chinese government and has attached an export agreement. So they have to export up to 40,000 tons of cocoa at the world price over the next 20 years. In the operation phase, we have basically a reduction in electricity generation from the Akosombo Dam during the initial impoundment of the Bui Dam. And then we add the electricity generation for the Bui Dam. Then we can see a change in electricity generation from the Akosombo Dam during the steady state operation and the Bui Dam as a result of the river flow regulation by the later dam. Here we can see the methodology that we are using. So this is our modeling framework. In this modeling framework, we have two components. One is a CG model, which we can see here. And this CG model, it is linked to a spatially explicit geophysical system model, which we can see here. So the economic model, we determine the macroeconomic, sectoral, and household level impacts of the Bui Dam. And the geophysical model will determine the hydropower generation considering hydrological uncertainty. So the changes in hydropower supply are then transmitted to the CG model as economic shocks to the hydropower output. So we have created a model which we call Investig, where we can consider the different stages of the Bui Dam. So we can consider the construction, the financing, and the operation. And for that reason, and to explain it better, we have split the government account into the income and expenditure. Of course, this is a very simple representation, so some things are omitted, but it will give you an idea of the analysis that we are doing here. So basically, we need to construct the dam, the Bui Dam. So we will face some construction costs. We need basically to buy some cement, materials, turbines from the rest of the world, and this will basically came from the national economy and the rest of the world. But we also need to finance the construction of this. And in order to have that, we have added to the CG model different financing options. So we have bonds, we have grants, we have foreign loans directly related to the rest of the world, but also the government could finance the construction of the dam by decreasing the government expenditure. On the operation phase, we can see that we basically the government will receive sales for the electricity which is being produced, by the government have to pay for the loans that allow the construction of the dam. And with the special export agreement, we can also see that the government needs to basically buy cocoa from the farmers at a national price and sell this to China at an agreed world price. So we can see that this framework will basically capture all these special conditions in which the Bui Dam has been constructed. Let's give some details about the CG model and also the biophysical model, but I will not go into details, just mention that the Investig model is able to assess infrastructure projects across the construction, financing, and operation phase of the project. It is based on the standard IFPRI-CG model, so it has very nice characteristics to assess the impacts of developing economies. So it has a differentiation between rural and urban households. It also has a differentiation between different types of labor. So we can see the impacts of skilled and unskilled labor. And it also adds the subsistence consumption, which is important in developing economies. And of course, it represents a small open economy. The model has been calibrated to the Ghanaian economy in 2009. So basically, the model represents all the economic transactions that the Ghanaian economy had had in 2009. And this is a recursive dynamic model. So we ran the model from 2009 to 2067. So we have 7 years in which we can simulate the electricity that has been produced by Ghana. And then we have 50 years in which we simulate electricity production, assuming different hydrological scenarios. The model accounts for an endogenous labor supply, and it has a sector-specific hydropower capital. This will allow us to consider the capital rents coming from the construction of the Bui Dam, and then compare this with the expenditures that we are facing in constructing that capital. So we have power generation split into hydro and non-hydro. Non-hydro basically is everything. It is all other types of power generation. And the most important thing is what I explained on the other slide. So in order to assess the construction phase, so we have introduced a project-specific activity, which is only active during the construction phase, and it reflects the cost of the dam. So we have gathered that information, and we have basically constructed a sector which is 100% representative of the cost of the Bui Dam. Then we have a very good representation of different financing options. So we have 4 financing options. We have bonds, we have foreign loans, we have foreign grants, and also the government expanding. And we are completely flexible on the different characteristics of these. So we can include, for example, grace periods, and we can also include different interest rates, as we have seen when we were describing the Bui Dam characteristics. Then we include the operation phase, and for this, we have a project-specific rent attributed to the project capital, which are separated from other rents. The operation maintenance costs are deducted. So basically, during the operation, we can see how much electricity is generated, and then we can see how much income the government will get for this electricity that has been generated. And then we will compare or subtract the operation and maintenance cost of this activity. The geophysical system model, so it is based on a rule-based water simulation model and simulates hydropower generation considering hydrological uncertainty. This is a simplified monthly engineered system model developed for the Ghana River. So it estimates electricity generation from both the the Bui Dam, and also the Akosombo Dam. The model covers the period 1993 to 2013 and includes 3 inflow points to represent the 3 major tributaries of the Volta River. As we have seen, these are the Black Volta, the White Volta, and the Oti River. So the model was calibrated from 1993 to 2003, and then was validated from 2004 to 2013. The Acosombo reservoir was operated to target a constant power production while keeping the reservoir water level between the minimum operating level and the full supply level. The Bui Dam was operated in a similar way during the steady state phase, but during the initial filling stage, the Bui Dam was operated based on target reservoirs storage values. We also include some hydrological uncertainty, and we generate 50 possible hydrological future by sampling from historical river flow records. So basically, we do not consider the influence of future climate change. Here we have the scenarios that we want to assess. As I mentioned, the models are running from 2009 to 2067. So we have 2 groups of scenarios. So we have one group in which we, so we have 2 groups of scenarios. In one scenario, the baseline scenario, we basically model electricity generation only from the Acosombo Dam. So we don't simulate the electricity generated by the Bui Dam. So this is basically the Ghana economy without the Bui Dam. In the second group of a scenario, we do have the influence of the Bui Dam and also the influence or the electricity production of the Acosombo Dam. So we have 3 scenarios here: an electricity only, where we can see an increase in hydropower production without considering the investment and financial needs. And we have done this to replicate previous studies where they only focus on the operational stage, so only when the electricity is produced. In the loans scenario, in addition to the electricity which is produced, we are also adding the construction phase of the dam and the 2 government-backed loans, the one which we have for 12 years and the Chinese loan that we have for 20 years. So we are considering, in addition to the electricity production, the construction of the Bui Dam, so the 622 million that we need for this, and also how we are going to pay for that. In the loan export scenario, in addition to what we consider in the loans scenario, we also include the special export of cocoa that has been dealt with the Chinese government. And these exports are from the period 2010 to 2028. And we have seen that, according to some statistics, on average, Ghana is exporting 22,000 tons of cocoa to China. So we keep this export constant during the whole period, and this represents 2.8% of the total production. Now, let's see the results. So here we have the macroeconomic impacts, and the red line are the results for the electricity only scenario. The green line, the results for the loans scenario, and the blue line are the results for the loan plus export scenario. We have 3 main periods. So C is basically indicating when the construction has finished. L1 is indicated when the first loan has been paid, and L2 is indicated when the second loan has been paid. As we have seen in the characteristics of the Bui Dam, it's very complex. And here in this table, we can see the timeline of the different phases of the Bui Dam. So we can see the construction going from 2009 to 2012, the impoundment phase from 2010 to 2016, the electricity generation, which actually started in 2013 and it goes until the end of our simulation period. And also we can see the two loan repayments. Both start in 2013 and one ends in 2024 and the other one ends in 2032. We also have here the cocoa exports from 2010 to 2028. As you see here, there are many factors affecting or behind the Bui Dam. And most of the studies, when they assess this type of projects, they only focus on the electricity generation. So they don't look at the construction impacts, they don't look at the financing impacts. And this is what we are going to do here. So let's focus first on the electricity only scenario. So let's have a look only the red line. So in the electricity only scenario, we can see that it is expected to increase GDP by 0.18% during the impoundment period. So it's this period. But then in the long run, GDP will increase on average by 0.55%. And the increase in hydropower generation will basically have positive impacts across the different sectors in the economy and will increase the output of non-energy sectors, will also increase the export of commodities, will increase employment, households, income, and investment. And here we can see this, that income is increasing, the general investment is also increasing in the electricity only scenario. In the loans scenario, GDP declines during the construction phase. I mean, because here in the loans scenario, we are adding the construction phase and the financing options that we have in order to pay for this, for the cost of the construction of the Bui Dam. So we can see that there is a small decline in GDP in the construction phase. This is 0.05%. And this is mainly caused by two reasons. One is a crowding out effect in labor and capital, and the other is a higher investment cost outside the dam construction. So basically what is happening is that as we need to construct a dam, then this construction will require more labor, more capital, and then we will have this crowding out effect from the other sectors of the economy. So the other sectors will face low availability of labor, low availability of capital, but at the same time, they will face also higher cost of investments. And however, once the Bui Dam is in operation, we can see that the GDP increases, and even it is a little bit higher, the GDP in the loans scenario compared to the electricity only scenario. And what we can see is that in the operation phase, the repayment of the loans will induce a depreciation of the exchange rate. So this will generate a positive impact on exports and economic growth. Let's see now what are the impacts when we add the export agreement. So here we can see that the GDP increases from basically when the export agreement started in 2010 to 2028. And this is mainly because of the cocoa exports agreement. And this will lead to a positive impact on investment, as we can see here, and mainly driven by a higher agricultural production, right? And we can see that once the export agreement finishes, then the GDP I mean, we will still have a positive impact on GDP, but this positive impact will decline, as we can see here. We also see that the increase in cocoa exports leads to an appreciation, in this case, of the local currency, affecting negatively other exports. We can see here, compare with the green or red line, which are the loans and the electricity scenario, that the exchange rate is lower because there is this appreciation. And this will, of course, have a negative impact of exports in all the sectors that we can see that the net effect for most of the economic sector is positive in the long run. Let's have a look now to the sectoral impacts. And let's consider first again the electricity only scenario. As we can see, because this scenario doesn't consider the construction of the Bui Dam, the impacts in the construction phase are basically zero. But during the operation phase, higher electricity availability has a positive impact in all economic activities, with the exception of the non-hydropower and other energy. That's because what we are seeing is a substitution between different types of energy. So basically, as we do have a higher hydropower production, then no hydropower will decline. And also, depending on the substitution possibilities of the different sectors to use different types of energy, we will also see that some sectors will start to move to use more electricity instead of using other types of energy. And that's why we also see here a decline on other energy production. Let's see now the impacts of the loans scenario. And here we can see for the construction phase, I mean, because here we are basically accounting for the amount that we need for the construction. So we can see that most economic activities like agriculture here, agri-food here, and industry will face a slight reduction in output due to the crowding out effect of capital and labor to meet the project financing and workforce requirements. The only exception is the construction. And its production, the production of the construction sector will increase by an average of 0.1% during the construction phase, because this is basically a direct impact to the construction of the Bui Dam. What happened now during the repayment phase? The repayment phase started in 2013, and we have here a clear differentiation between the public sector and the private sectors or the other sectors in the economy. So let's have a look first what is happening with the public sector. So the public service faced a decrease in output by around 1.5% when the dam is operational, given that the government pays for the difference between the sales of electricity and the loan repayments. We need to consider that because the electricity production starts very low and then increases, but the government will need to pay for the difference because they have basically not enough income from the sales of electricity compared to the payment of the loans that the government has to do. And this will have a negative impact in public services. And as the loan repayments are in foreign currency, this will increase the exchange rate, and all other activities show an increase in output compared to the electricity only scenario, because we have a depreciation of the exchange rate, which basically induce to have higher exports. Here we can see the impacts for the loan plus export scenario. And in this scenario, we can see that the effects are even amplified further. Here we can see that agricultural production increases a lot, and this is mainly due to the export agreement. But also we can see that there are higher prices for agricultural commodities because also the land availability declines and there is high rents. So this will have a negative impact on the agricultural, on the agri-food and also on other industries. And the public spending is affected even further. We can see that in the when basically in the period in which we start with the export agreement, then we have a decline in the public service by around 1%, as the government has to compensate cocoa producers for the difference between the world market price and the domestic market price. So what we have to think here is that every time that there is a difference between the world market price and the domestic price for cocoa, the government needs to pay for that difference, because the government has agreed to sell 22, as in this case, 22,000 tons of cocoa to the Chinese government at a fixed market price. And of course, what he is paying in the internal market could be higher or lower, and this will have, as in this case, we can see here, a negative impact on the public finances. And we will explore this impact on the income and expenditure of the public sector in the next slides. Here we can see the impact on households. Here we can see the consumption expenditure. Let's focus first on the electricity-only scenario. So here we can see that the electricity-only scenario has a slightly higher impact on the income and consumption of rural households than for urban households. In the loan scenario, in the loan scenario, when we compare to the electricity-only scenario, we can show a reduction in the income here, an expenditure of households during the dam impoundment phase, which vanish in the long run. In the scenario loans and exports, we can see that the consumption expenditure of urban households decreases up to 2018, giving lower revenues from employment and non-agricultural capital. But at the same time, we can see that the rural household consumption increases because also they have a higher revenues due to a higher agricultural production and higher land rents. And of course, once the export agreement has finished, we can then see a decline in the income and consumption of the rural households. And then in the long term, we can see a small decline in the positive impact in rural household consumption. But for urban households, this impact or the positive effect on consumption keeps constant in the long run. So now let's have a look at a detailed analysis of what is happening in the government income and expenditure. So here we have a graph which shows the project capital income and the loan repayments. So let's start first from here. So we basically need to spend more money constructing the Bui Dam, and this is represented here by this expenditure. And also we need basically to access to loans in order to finance the construction of the dam, and this is what we can see here. And during the operation of the dam, we can see that we will have income because of the agricultural sales, but also we have to pay for the loans that we have. And with the special agreement, we have to see that cocoa, we need to buy cocoa from the farmers, and then and this is basically here, and then we sell this at a fixed price to China, and this is an income basically, because the government is selling these exports and is receiving money for this, and this is an income which is constant because we have assumed that we will always export the same amount of cocoa. So those are the different lines that we are plotting here, and okay. And then the government accounts in the loans and loan export, which are basically showing this graph, are identical during the construction phase. Since the sales of electricity generated during the project are initially zero and gradually increase, this is what we can see here, the government pays higher loan repayments during the first 16 years of the dam operation, and this will have a negative impact in the net income of the government. But we can see that the net impact is positive once the first loan has been paid. For the other scenario, for the loan and export scenario, the cost of the cocoa procurement is also higher than the income from the cocoa export, which is set at a fixed world price. Therefore, the spending on public services declines. And we can see that the expenditure will decline an additional 0.5 to 5 million US dollars per year in this scenario. After the repayment of the first loan, the net effect is positive due to the higher electricity revenues and the lower repayment levels. So we can also see this here. Here we have a summary of the results, and this is basically a cumulative impact for the whole period that we are assessing, and we are using a 10% discount rate. Here we can see that the cumulative GDP, also we can see the rural household cumulated real income, and we also see, yes, and also see the urban household cumulated real income. So the mean cumulative impact in all scenarios, here we have the electricity only scenario, the loan scenario, and the loan export scenario, are comparable or considerable higher than the initial value of the project. We have to remember that the Bui Dam cost 622 million US dollars, and we can see the cumulative GDP impact is higher than that. In these two scenarios are relatively higher, but when we consider the export agreement, then there is an even further impact on GDP. And the real income effect is higher for rural households than for urban households. And this is also related to the export agreement that we have. Under the loan under the loan plus export scenario, the real income gains are even larger for the rural households. Now let's talk about the conclusion. So basically, in this paper, we have developed a model in order to assess the economy-wide impacts of hydropower development across the project construction, financing, and operation. And the results demonstrate that the inclusion of the construction and the financing phases is basically crucial because of the cumulative impacts, but also because of the temporal evolution of the different variables that we have analyzed. So the inclusion of the financing conditions for the Bui Dam leads to a 68% increase in the mean discounted GDP gains. And this increase is driven by the additional economy-wide effects of higher cocoa production. So therefore, we support the literature claiming that the economy-wide approach that goes beyond the quantification of the direct impacts of projects is appropriate for an ex-ante economic assessment of infrastructure investments. That's all I wanted to say. Thank you very much.